Hey everyone, today I want to talk to you about the Mars retrograde that is happening from December 6th to February 23rd in the signs of Leo and Cancer. And I want to talk to you about it because I think it's really valuable to look at the archetypes connected to Mars, connected to Leo and to Cancer, and to bring that all together with journaling prompts. Before we start, let's talk about my approach a little bit and why this video might be interesting for you. Right off the bat, I want to say I'm not interested in fear-mongering, because there is a lot of fear-mongering always around Mercury retrograde, and with Mars retrograde, just like any retrograde, the general media loves to make it out to be a terrible time for all of us, and I'm not about that. This video is all about self-reflection, about going into the depth, and I will help you get to know the archetypes better so you don't have so much fear or worry about Mars retrograde. And I will also give you some journaling prompts to work with it. Of course, there's always a lot more astrologically happening around than just one single transit. So looking at it in isolation is not going to tell you everything there is and all of the energies. But I really want to take a deep dive into Mars, into Cancer, and into Leo today, because I think with this kind of psychological astrology or archetypal astrology, we can learn a lot about ourselves and learn how to really use these energies during that time. And what I'm hoping is that this video gives you a little framework on how to work with Mars retrograde and how to work with the energies in the next 2.5-3 months, because I feel like it can be really beneficial to sometimes focus on one aspect of what is going on in the sky and really work with that, rather than trying to understand the bigger picture, trying to understand everything, and then you end up not doing anything because you're overwhelmed with looking at all the degrees, looking at all the planets, looking at all the interactions between them. So looking at one transit in isolation can really help us tune into one aspect of the energies that is happening around us, and that's what we're going to do today. It's a very polarizing topic because Mars and Leo, and to a degree also Cancer, are very polarizing archetypes. As you will see, I will talk about all of that because people have very strong feelings about them and what's wrong with them or what's right with those archetypes. But I also want to say, as usual in these videos, we want to find the nuance in all of that and how we can actually apply it to our lives. How, in this case, the private sphere and the outward sphere, our self-expression, beautifully come together this Mars retrograde, and how it can inspire us to reflect on what we feel inside and what we show to the world and what we hide from the world. That's really the main themes of this Mars retrograde, in my opinion. So let's first get the facts right so you can write those down in your little notebook, because I always think that's very helpful. So first of all, Mars is currently in retrograde. I'm uploading this video as it has already happened. It happens a lot less than Mercury retrograde. Mercury retrograde is every few months, as you may know. Every few months we have articles coming out warning us about the dangers of Mercury retrograde, whereas with Mars retrograde, we only have that about every 2 years or every 2.5 years. So it happens a lot more rarely and might have a bigger effect than a Mercury retrograde, which is really just a part of daily business and a part of fluctuation because it happens so often. Also, I want to say, I apologize in advance if I ever say in this video Mercury retrograde. I mean Mars retrograde. I mean, except for the sentences I just said about Mercury retrograde, but it might happen that it just rolls off my tongue. But whenever I say that from this point onwards, I mean Mars retrograde. So the Mars retrograde starts on December 6th in the sign of Leo. So the Mars starts retrograding, going backwards from how we view it from Earth on December 6th. Then on January 6th, it arrives back in Cancer, and then it stays in Cancer all the way until the end of the retrograde, which is February 23rd. So overall, we're looking at the time period from December 6th to February 23rd. And you can also remember that on January 6th, the sign changes. So it goes from Leo back into Cancer and then stays in Cancer till the end of the retrograde. Also, just as a piece of information, the next Mars retrograde will be in January 2027. It's always so crazy to think about things that are so far in the future, but yeah, that's what's happening there. So before we dive into this Mars retrograde, take some space and some time to look at what happened during the last ones, because I feel like looking at the last 2 or 3 transits that worked the same way, or the same transits, can be very helpful. So I will tell you now the dates of the last 2 Mars retrogrades. You can also note those down if you want and think about whether anything happened there, and that might give you clues as to what to expect in this one. So there was a Mars retrograde from September 9th, 2020 to November 13th, 2020. And then the last Mars retrograde was October 30th, 2022 to January 12th, 2023. So you can look at those time periods, think about it. For me, both of those periods were really about having to do with standing my ground, with detaching from people that had a negative effect on me, and also about letting stored up anger out. It didn't go so well during the first one, but during the last one, I was able to free myself of some very negative influences in my life. So maybe you can expect something similar. Look at those time periods, how they played out for you. Of course, you can also go even further back and look at Mercury retrogrades, Mars retrogrades. Here we go. I told you. Look at Mars retrogrades all the way back to your birth or whatever. But honestly, I feel like after 2 or 3 years, it's hard for me to really remember how I felt during a certain time, unless something really big happened there. But even then, I think at some point we kind of lose the immediate sense of how did I feel during that time. So it's always better to look at the ones that are more recent, but that's up to you. You can also look at the ones that were further in the past. So now that we have the facts down, let's talk about Mars as an archetype. I think Mars is one of those planets, one of those archetypes, or also one of those gods, if you want to look at Mars, the god, that is very polarizing. And by that I mean it has, on a societal level, aspects that are admired and that are positive, and aspects that are very negative, viewed very negatively from society. And of course, we need to question that a little bit and need to see how do we relate to those feelings or energies or concepts surrounding Mars. So the clear good sides, or what society would consider maybe helpful or admirable with the archetype of Mars, are passion, definitely passion for what you love, passion for your work, passion for your hobbies, maybe even passion for your partner, and the drive to start things, the drive to get things done. So Mars is also this initiatory energy, being driven, being maybe ambitious to reach your goals, taking initiative on taking action to reach whatever small or big dream you have. And also it is associated with being strong, being protective, you know, the whole warrior archetype that comes with Mars. Then talking about the bad sides that are associated with Mars, and by bad, I mean what society considers bad, which we have to question, remember. We have things like anger, aggression, intensity that is outwardly expressed so that others can clearly see it and feel it. Untamed self-expression, maybe also not quite fitting into society because of that untamed self-expression, and being more of a lone fighter than being a team player. Those are the aspects that are maybe considered more negative, the whole aggression, anger, frustration part. So as I was reading this, pay attention to how you feel about those concepts and about these connotations behind Mars as an archetype, because Mars retrograde, in my experience, goes really not into how some people would say that, I don't know, people are more aggressive or there's something stored up that is going to explode or something. But for me, it's more about transforming those intense emotions like anger or like frustration into passion or into something that feels more helpful for you. What I want to stress here is it's not about masking your anger for society, and that's why you're supposed to, I don't know, suppress it or transform it into something else. It's really about what you need. So Mars retrograde is a time where you tune into what helpful and what unhelpful emotions you might be feeling. For example, anger can be a super helpful emotion. We feel it, we have to let it out, we have to express it instead of suppressing it. But if we get into too much of a loop of anger or of frustration or of negativity, that can be unhelpful for us, independently of what society thinks about all of this. Leave that out of the mix, but just think about where those emotions might need some transformation within you. And we will talk about that in the journaling prompts in a second. So with a retrograde, we always have this idea of going inward, not being the shining warrior knight that Mars is outwardly and fighting battles all the time or letting out all your anger, but rather in being a brave knight that is going back to his little hamlet or taking a little break in a cave, sitting down, being mindful, sitting, taking off your armor, becoming vulnerable in order to grow and to come back stronger after this Mars retrograde. So here's some of the questions that you can ask yourself as you are in Mercury retrograde or preparing for it. These questions are now tuned to the archetype of Mars, but there will be more questions tuned to the archetype of Leo and Cancer later in the video. But these ones are just like a little teaser how you can work with the energy of Mars during this retrograde. So as you're watching this, I would recommend taking notes about the first things that you might think of when you hear me say these questions, because those first few thoughts, they never come back, and sometimes they're really helpful, those first associations. All right, so the first question in relation to Mars retrograde, working with the archetype of Mars, is what situations this year felt like literal battles for you? That can be internal battles, it can be external battles. And how do you feel about how you fought them? How do you feel about how those battles went for you? Do you feel satisfied with it? Do you feel like unsatisfied with how you handled them? Think about that. The second question is, what armor have you constructed for yourself to feel safe? Specifically, maybe it can be all your life, but it can also be since the last retrograde, which, as I said, ended in January 2023. So you can specifically think about from that point onwards, since Mars has been direct all this time and you've maybe built up an armor, built up new habits, or you can think about it all your life, whatever calls to you. So what do I mean by armor? I mean thought processes, habits, thoughts, acts that are meant to keep you safe. And now if you've thought about that armor that you have, also ask yourself, how does that armor restrict your self-expression? Does it somehow restrict your actions because you are telling yourself that you can't go a certain path because you're trying to protect yourself from it, but maybe now that you think about it, it would be more true to your own self and to your self-expression to go that path. So that's Mars retrograde is like a perfect time to think about that. Okay, the third question goes a bit deep, which is also about expression, and that is, if you could say anything to anyone, what would you say and to who? I know at first this question sounds superficial, but we're going to go deeper with it, because once you have thought about why and who, about what you want to say and who you want to say it to, you will think about the why. You will think about why do you want to say it, but why are you not saying it? Why haven't you yet said that? And with these questions, you can go really deep, because if you have something on your heart that you want to say or that you want to express to the outside world, whether that is a full new part of your personality or whether that's just one thing that you want to complain to someone about, it can be either of those. You now have two options. Option one is to think about why you're not saying it and find peace with that. Maybe you are not expressing a certain part of yourself because you are thinking it's against your values. Maybe it's against your values to show that part of yourself, or it's against your values to say something, to say that thing to that person, whatever it may be, and you feel like it's not the right thing to do. But the thing is, if that is how you think, you have to be at peace with never saying it and never expressing it, because you have made the decision not to consciously. Or maybe as you are thinking about it, you're noticing that you really have to express it. You really have to say that thing. And this way, with this reflection, you're not always so torn on the inside. You know, those situations where you're always torn between, I want to say it, I want to show it, or do I not want to say it? Do I not want to show that side of myself? So you're not so torn because you find peace with not saying it based on a conscious decision, or you decide that it is time to say it, to show it, to express it. So those two are the possible results, and then you will have more peace because you reflected about it. All right, and the last question here for the Mars archetype is, how do you feel about anger and frustration? Do you allow yourself to feel them, or do you tend to suppress them? And can you find healthier ways to express your anger? This one is a deep one as well, because I think those parts of ourselves that are angry really want to belong somewhere. They really want to be seen. Where there is anger, there is a need to be seen. The need for something to be said, seen, heard, whatever, to be expressed. So thinking about where that lies within ourselves and how we feel about that anger or that frustration can be very cathartic, to really feel it and to give space to it rather than always trying to suppress it, and finding ways to transform it, as I said, into passion, into expression. That's really something that is really, really beneficial work to do during Mars retrograde, because the energies are just supporting you in those reflections. All right, are you ready? Because now that I have gone through those journaling prompts, we're going to dive into the archetypes of Leo and Cancer. As I said before, on December 6th, which has already happened, we are going into retrograde, and it stays in Leo. Mars stays in Leo until January 6th, and then on January 6th, it changes into Cancer and stays there until it goes direct again February 23rd. So we kind of have like a little half and half. It's not really half and half. It's 1 month of Mars retrograde in Leo, and then 1.5 months of Mars retrograde in Cancer. So let's talk about Leo first. Leo is associated with the sun, as many of you will know, but just like Mars, I feel like Leo is often seen as either really good or really bad in most people's eyes. And I feel like we also have this clear polarization of the concepts connected to it. As I said, I'm all about nuance. So is Mars retrograde. Mars retrograde is really not about clear-cut answers. It's really about nuance and about reflection. So let's first, again, look at those two very polarizing sides that Leo has to it, and then find the nuance within that. So the traits that Leo is associated with that our society would deem more negative is being so prideful that it turns into arrogance. A lot of people associate Leo with arrogance. Also, sometimes it is seen as the laziest of the fire signs, because if you have the Sagittarius and the Aries energy next to it, Leo seems like the slowest one, the steady one. So there's this association of the pride that Leo has not being warranted. It's just about the ego. It's just about external facade, but not something that the Leo has actually accomplished. But Leo is also associated with very positive traits that are sometimes forgotten or not really talked about. So, of course, there's also the side of a Leo having justified pride in what they have achieved. And the thing here is that many people don't feel proud of what they have achieved in their life, and Leos sometimes tend to have an easier time with that. The energy is all about pride, all about finding joy in what you have done. There's also the aspect of generosity with money, with time, or whatever resource. Giving very freely of yourself is a trait that is assigned to Leo. Also, we have the association with the inner child. So seeing the world in a magical way, making it your own, and also being very pompous to the point that people tend to admire you and tend to, see your facade and love it. I think the interesting thing about people who have a lot of Leo energy is that they are either loved or hated a lot of the time. It's kind of this celebrity vibe where there's no in between. Either you love them or you hate them. And they have their admirers. They have the people who love their charm, who love their generosity, who love their pompous appearance. And then there's people who don't like Leos because they need a lot of attention. They want admiration. They look for it. They seek it. And those people might see that as a weakness on the Leo's part. This is also very nuanced. Some of the haters probably, yes, are jealous and they wish they had what the Leo has, but some of the haters might also be right. They might be looking through the facade, seeing through the facade that other people see and just admire the person. So I think it's really important to stay nuanced here as well, because often we have this tendency to be like, oh, if someone is prideful and someone has a big ego and someone doesn't like them, they're just jealous. I think there's more to it than that sometimes, but not always. So you can't really generalize here, which is something I said already. I think people do with Leos all the time. We generalize it and we either love them or hate them. Now, before we combine the archetypes of Leo and Cancer to get those questions, let's move on to Cancer and the meaning, the connotations, the associations with that archetype. Cancer is an archetype that our society, the Western society, usually views as very motherly. It's associated with the moon, which is interesting because Leo is associated with the sun. So I feel like we have this sun and moon energy kind of taking us through this Mars retrograde and through this winter until February 23rd. And I think that's something interesting to think about, that we have this moon, the sun energy first in December, and then this moon energy in January and February, kind of governing Mars retrograde. So Cancer has a lot of classical positive associations, like providing a lot of security, also needing a lot of security, but also providing a lot of security, like building a home as a safe space, but also metaphorically being a safe space for people. Cancer is kind of seen as the person you talk to when you have an issue because they will take care of you. They have this motherly energy associated with them. And also they are said to be very in tune with their emotions. However, Cancer also has some negative associations, which might be that they are very quick to clam up and not share those emotions, and then express those emotions in passive aggression and doing passive aggressive things, rather than being direct. Now, I think that's a little bit problematic because in our society, we tend to associate mothers with passive aggression, and thus also Cancer with passive aggression. I don't want to go too deep into this, but I think that's a topic that you could make a whole video about, how femininity or motherhood in specific, motherhood specifically, are associated with repression and with repressed anger and frustration, and thus becoming passive aggressive. it is an issue that exists in reality, but we also have to think about why it exists, and that is the disempowerment of women and that feeling of not having the ability to express emotions directly or speak about things directly, because it usually doesn't turn out well for women historically. So that's a very interesting topic to think about with Cancer here. Now, let's move on from that. If we think about Cancer as the sign of the moon, we have some really important connotations that I want to draw your attention to here. Because the moon is often associated with the inner world, the deeper world, the emotional depths, the privacy, intimacy. That's all like the moon sphere in the dark, in the night. Things happen that are private. And it's also associated with those parts of us that we don't want people to see, whether that's parts of our body, parts of our minds, parts of our thoughts, parts of what we would like to say but don't say. So Cancer in itself is really about that privacy and protecting something that you don't want others to see, hiding something essentially in the dark. So you can remember that Cancer is all about that private sphere, the domestic sphere, the home, the intimate parts of us that we are keeping from the outside world. And maybe you're already catching my drift, but I think this can guide us very beautifully into seeing on one side Leo associated with the sun as a sign of self-expression and a sign of ego, a sign of this is my facade, this is who I am. Maybe it's a facade, or maybe it is actually who I am, who knows. And then the privacy and the calmness of Cancer as a juxtaposition to that. And all of that is tied together then with the energy of Mars retrograde, which is all about reflecting on our actions, reflecting on our deepest feelings that we sometimes tend to push down. And maybe you can see this big, very sensical picture. It makes a lot of sense to me that this is happening. So the first part of Mars retrograde might be, and by the first part I mean December until January 6th, when it is in Leo, might be more about reflecting on our self-expression, our goals in life, our pride. What are we proud of? What are we not proud of? How do we relate to difficult emotions like anger? And the second phase would more be about security, about how passionate we feel about our home, about taking action to make ourselves feel safe. And also a huge part of this, and I can only really recommend you to work with this because the energies are good for this kind of reflection, is the negotiation of what do we show of ourselves that we were previously hiding, that we were previously pushing down, and what do we need in order to feel safe to show those sides of ourselves as well. Not just show our true self inside of our homes, in our own privacy with a mirror, but also to show ourselves to others authentically. So now let's get into the questions and the journaling prompts that I would recommend you can also work with during Mars retrograde. These journaling prompts are more tuned towards Leo and Cancer. It's something to reflect about in those two time periods, whereas the journaling prompts I said earlier are something you can just do all the way throughout Mars retrograde. Once again, I would recommend that you have your pen ready and jot down your first answers or your first thoughts. So the first question associated with Leo and Cancer energies for this Mars retrograde is, what expression do you wish you could take to the outside world, but just don't feel comfortable with? And what part of you is this? How would you describe that part of you? The second question is, with what people or in what situations do you feel fully comfortable expressing yourself? And also, going along with that, can you identify what attributes those people or situations have that give you that space to feel so comfortable, to show like a more intimate side, a more private side of yourself? Does it maybe have to do with your home space? Does it have to do with your inner space? Does it have to do with your friends, the outside world? and then see what are the conditions in which you feel comfortable to express yourself in a way that feels really authentic to you. The third question is, where do you have to put up a facade that feels uncomfortable to you? Keep in mind here that not all facades are uncomfortable. We all have a certain facade to the outside world. It wholly depends on what kind of person you are. If you are the kind of person who openly talks about taboo topics like sex in spaces like the workplace, where it's usually seen as indecent, then think about why you do that, think about why you wouldn't do that, and how it feels for you. Because this is also a very nuanced topic. We can't just reduce this to, oh, this person wants attention, oh, they can't keep anything to themselves, oh, it's just who they are, it's fine that they're like this. There's so many options how people could think about you, but that's really not what you should be concerned about. It's about, why are you expressing yourself the way you do? What facades are you keeping up, and why? And how can you maybe become more authentic? I still have a lot of questions, so stay with me here. The fourth one is, where do you feel the need to be dominant in order to feel safe? And can you try, as a little experiment, as a little exercise, try to be less domineering in those situations and see things from a different perspective, and just see what happens if you're not the one taking the reins, if you're not the Mars warrior taking action, but you're maybe a bit more vulnerable and a bit more taken back. Just wait things out rather than control things, and see how that feels. Now, very specifically, the next question is, what do you want people to see about you, and what do you not want people to see about you? That could be attributes that you have, traits that you have. It could be parts of your body. It could be anything really. And then think about, why do you not want people to see it? Is there some shame? Is there some fear? Go deep with that, because shame can be really, really powerful. And to let go of shame, we really need to know the source of it, and we need to change how we think about it in general. Shame is something super difficult to ever let go of. Sometimes it's impossible, but thinking about why we have it and where it comes from can be helpful. The next question is a bit shorter, but easier maybe. What are you proud of recently, and why? What are you proud of? What are you proud of that you've done, whether that is since the last Mars retrograde in 2023, January, almost 2 years ago, or whether it is something that recently happened that you feel proud of, and why are you proud of it? The why is always sounds like such a basic question, but once you start thinking about it, it really reveals your values as well, because what you are proud of reveals what's important to you, what priorities you have, what values you have. Now, the next question relates to the whole idea that Leo is related to the inner child, and I think this is a really interesting question. What did you think your life would look like as a child, and how does it look today? And how does that feel to you? And can you get some of that magic back into your life? Because sometimes as a child, maybe I had like this romantic idea of my life where I'm a writer, like Carrie Bradshaw-esque or something, sitting in my home, making it all cozy and just writing my thoughts. And honestly, that is a part of my life now, but sometimes that feels like a chore and not like something I would enjoy. But if we tune back into how we saw things as a child and how we imagined things as a child, we can make them feel positive again and good again, and give them some of that little magic back. So that is the question. My Patreon has even more journaling prompts every month. This month in December, they are all about creating big or small change in your life. And I think that goes really well with this reflection that we just did with the Mars retrograde as well. So head over there. There's essays, journaling prompts, general readings where I go into the energies of the months, and also affirmations to really change, and also a lot of bonus content. I also want to remind you to subscribe, because you might be a new viewer coming from the astrology side of YouTube, because I usually talk about tarot on here, about witchcraft, about spirituality, and not so often about tarot. But not so often about astrology. But if you want to hear more about all of those topics, about mysticism, if you're curious, then subscribe and be here and like the video and share it and do all those things. Also, let me know in the comments, did you like it? Did you not like it? I'm wondering if I should make more videos like this going into the energies that surround the archetypes of planets, of zodiac signs, and how we could work with that energy that we are faced with during certain transits. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this gave you a framework to work with so you know what energies are around us, what energies are beneficial to work with right now, and what to maybe avoid. Definitely avoid fear-mongering about Mars retrograde. Definitely don't be scared of it. It's a wonderful time, just like Mercury retrograde, to slow down and to reflect. And it takes us out of that whole performance mentality that we have in our society a lot of the time. So it's something inspiring, it's something positive. So let's roll with it. Let's work with it as it happens rather than trying to resist it and be scared of it and be fearful, because we can't expand, we can't grow if we are full of fear about something. So that's why I made this video. I hope it gave you some nuance about Mars retrograde. Thank you so much for watching. Check out my Instagram, check out my Patreon. I'm really happy if you join me over there, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you.